Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Google Ads API webinar on hotel ads, specifically on listing groups and reporting. My name is Adam Oren. I'm a developer advocate here at Google, and I'm here with Tanet Pranani. I knew I was going to mess that up. I'll let him introduce himself. Nak?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Tanit Nek Praninararat. I'm a developer programs engineer based in Tokyo.
Okay, so we are both here today. We're going to be delivering the content of this hotel ads webinar together along the way. But before we get started, we have a few things of administrivia we just want to get out of the way right before we get going. First thing, also see in the YouTube chat, we just pasted a link to the slides. You can download a PDF copy of the slides as we go. It makes it a lot easier to follow along with us. We know we have a lot of hyperlinks in the slide deck content, so having a PDF copy with the clickable links alongside that you can page through as we go through the slides will make everything a whole lot easier. So I'll give you a second on this slide, anybody who needs it, to download that PDF. Keep a copy handy. But if you miss it, don't worry. It's in the chat for the video, so you can go to the YouTube chat and get the link there and make sure you have a PDF copy of this slide deck as we keep going. The only thing that we ask is please don't share it. It's for your use during this webinar, basically as a tool to help you learn. Please don't, if you want to share it with some colleagues who didn't make the webinar or something like that, that's totally fine, but please don't post it on a blog or anything else, or share it in any other capacity. That's the only thing that we ask. Okay, and one more bit of housekeeping before we get into the content regarding the question and answer session. So you see a link across the top of the screen says ask a question at slides.app. Some URL there. This is how this is what makes this a webinar rather than just a basic live stream, and makes it interactive. Please click on that link again. We've also pasted this link in the chat, so it makes it a little easier to get it. So click the link either in the chat or type it into a web browser, and you'll be able to bring up the question and answer door. You'll be able to submit questions using at any time using a screen that you'll see on the screen like this. This one's got my face on it. It'll have your face when you're logged in. You can either ask a question anonymously or put your name to it so we know who's asking it. If somebody else has already asked the question, you can upvote interesting ones and add new ones as we go, just to make sure the content is matching the questions that you ask. You don't need to wait. So ask these at any time, then we're going to have a question and answer section at the end, and we'll address all the questions there when we get to it. Okay, just want to put this webinar in context. This is part of an ongoing webinar series that we've started mainly around the new Google Ads API. So if you're not too familiar with the new Google Ads API, we'll give you a quick 1 or 2 line intro into what's going on there, because you need to have a little bit of context to understand what's going on with hotel ads vis-a-vis the hotel the Google Ads API. But we had 2 Google Ads API webinars last year in 2018. But more importantly, in July, we had another Hotel Ads overview webinar. So this webinar today is sort of a second part, or what comes after the first webinar that we had on hotel ads. So you'll actually see the first section that we have here in the content deck is an overview of last time. So if any of the stuff in the first section of this deck sounds like anything you want more details on, we definitely encourage you to go back and watch that first webinar, because it has a lot more details and goes into things like code samples and stuff like that that we don't necessarily touch on in this one, because we're sort of assuming that you've seen that content already. Okay, as for what we're covering today, here's the agenda. We're going to have a quick introduction into the Google Ads API itself, basically just telling you what it is. We're not necessarily going to go too deep into that, because the subject here is really how to deal with hotel ads vis-a-vis the API. And then the second section is a review of campaign management. Now, this section is pretty much the entire last webinar. We covered this in pretty grueling detail in that last webinar I mentioned. We went into the basics of creating campaigns, and we ran through code examples on how you do that. So we're going to touch upon those things just to make sure that they're fresh in everybody's mind. But if any of this, you want more details on any of this, or you want to go any deeper on any topic, this is the time to go back to the previous webinar. And then I'm going to hand the presentation off to Nak, and he's going to talk a little bit about listing groups. This is a little bit new. We didn't cover this in the last webinar, but this is vital to understand how hotel ad campaigns work in the new Google Ads API environment. And then we're also going to touch on hotel ad specific reporting. How do you get reporting for your hotel ads using the new API? That's a little bit new as well. I don't think we touched on any of the reporting features in the last API, or the last webinar, excuse me. And then finally, we're going to get to the questions. So we'll answer any questions that popped up at the end once we've got through all these different sections. Okay, so starting off with the Google Ads API introduction. So for anyone who's not familiar, the Google Ads API is the next generation of the AdWords API. And that's fairly important because the AdWords API was a programmatic interface to AdWords when it was called AdWords. That API had been around for a good part of 10 years, so it's pretty long in the tooth. So we decided to release a new version of the API, completely build it, re-architected from the ground up on much newer technology, and rename it to the Google Ads API, sort of at the same time that we rebranded AdWords from AdWords to Google Ads. And just to give you a little bit of context on when that happened, the AdWords API actually is still available, even though the Google Ads API is also available today. So if you aren't familiar with the AdWords API, it used to be released with versions as its sort of dates as its versioning scheme. So we had a 2018-02, a 2018-06, 2018-09 for different yearly and monthly releases of the AdWords API. You'll notice looking at this timeline that sort of stopped in 2018-09. We've had what we consider the final release of the AdWords API because we've since released the Google Ads API, which is a complete replacement for it. And everything related to the programmatic interface to Google Ads is now in the Google Ads API, and that's where most of our focus is on right now. So we had a pretty long beta for the Google Ads API through most part of 2018, and back in March of this year, we released version 1.0 of the Google Ads API. So why is this important to hotel ads users, and why are we bringing this up here? Because the Google Ads API has built-in native support for hotel ads, and this is very important because it affects how you use hotel ads, and there's now a new way to run hotel ads using Google Ads and the Google Ads API now that we have this new API out. And that's sort of the context within which all the stuff that we're talking about in this webinar and the stuff we covered in the last webinar is occurring in. We're adding many new features to the Google Ads API, and the hotel native support for hotel ads is one of them. So if anybody has any previous experience with shopping campaigns, you'll find a good analogy with shopping campaigns to hotel ads because that architecture is very similar. We'll talk a little more about that when we get into it. But if you're familiar with how shopping campaigns link Merchant Center and Google Ads in order to run ads for your products, similarly, in this new architecture for hotel ads, the Google Ads API connects to the Hotel Ad Center as its data source and runs hotel ads for that data. And so we have a very analogous setup. So that's something to sort of keep in mind. If you have experiences with shopping ads, this new hotel ad setup is going to look very familiar. Okay, so before we had the new Google Ads API and we had native support for hotel ads built into the API, hotel ads management looked very different. It was done entirely with the Google Hotel Ad Center and the Google Travel Partner API. It managed this entire hierarchy of objects that we have on the screen here, from accounts to sub-accounts to the advertising campaigns in them that had budgets, bidding strategies, and different ad groups. And you also had hotel groups within those sub-accounts. Then you also had hotel prices and inventory that sort of lived outside of the hotel ads account system, but also still lived in the ecosystem of hotel ads and the Travel Partner API. So this is the setup that we had before, and we're moving away from that because the key critical parts in this diagram that have analog in the Google Ads API and Google Ads in general are moving directly into Google Ads, and you'll be using for example, the campaigns, the ad groups, and things like that are native to Google Ads instead of separate copies of those objects that are in the Hotel Ad Center in the Travel Partner API. So to make this a little bit easier to understand what's sort of transitioning over, if we list out the pieces of that diagram that we had before, we had accounts, sub-accounts, campaigns, ad groups, hotel groups, bid multipliers, hotels, and hotel prices. In the previous world, before we had the Google Ads API, these were all managed via the Hotel Ads Center and the Travel Partner API. Now that the Google Ads API is in the mix, all these objects that have analogs in the Google Ads system are being sort of deprecated in favor of using those analogs that exist inside of Google Ads. So everything in blue here is stuff that lived in Hotel Ad Center, and everything in green are objects that are now in the Google Ads API. And you can see we've stricken through a whole bunch of them, pretty much everything except for hotel and hotel prices. That's the stuff that still lives in Hotel Ad Center in the Travel Partner API. You still manage your hotel inventory, your hotel prices via your feeds in Hotel Ad Center. That's not changing. So the data, the raw data behind your hotels and your inventory, the stuff that's not necessarily related to ads, stays where it is. All the stuff that's related to running ads, though, you now are using the Google Ads API to do that. So Google Ads accounts take over for the Hotel Ad Center notion of accounts. Sub-accounts go away. The Google Ads API doesn't have a notion of sub-accounts. Every account is a Google Ads account. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't manage multiple accounts and multiple merchants or hoteliers. The Google Ads system has a notion of Google Ads Manager account. So if you're running a setup as a third party where maybe you're managing advertising on behalf of a bunch of hotel chains or hotels that have their own independent accounts, and you're a third party ad provider, then you can actually create a Google Ads Manager account, collect all those client accounts underneath that Google Ads Manager account, and be on your way. But the important thing to realize here that everything is now a full-fledged Google Ads account. And in those Google Ads accounts, they have full-fledged Google Ads campaigns. So you're not dealing with Hotel Ad Center campaigns anymore. And these are top-level bona fide campaigns. Google Ads supports many different types of campaigns. You have search ad campaigns, you have display campaigns, shopping campaigns, and so similarly now you can have hotel ads campaigns. It's a top-level campaign type in which you can run hotel ads in Google Ads. And then within those campaigns, you create ad groups. And within those ad groups, here's something that's actually different. We want to point this out. That you didn't have to deal with in the Hotel Ad Center. You actually have to create ad objects. In the Hotel Ad Center, in the previous world, when you weren't using the Google Ads API, you would create ad groups. The ads themselves, the creatives would get automatically created and filled in and run. In the Google Ads system, this is similar. This is the same across any type of ad you're running in Google Ads. You do have to create an actual ad object that lives in an ad group, even if it's just a placeholder, even if it's going to be dynamically filled in by data that's in your hotel inventory or your hotel price feed. You still have to at least say, I want to create an ad object, so you can get an ID and know what that object ID is. Because for one thing, that helps you later on down the road in reports. When you want to pull reporting, you can identify ads by their ID and say, I want impressions, clicks, cost, impression share metrics for this particular ad. And that facilitates you, it basically gives you a handle for pulling reports and dealing with that object programmatically in the API. So it isn't necessary to create an ad. Hotel groups in the Hotel Ad Center are being replaced by hotel listing groups. They function in a similar fashion semantically, but the section that Mac's going to present in a little while will go into detail on how you set up those listing groups in Google Ads. They have a hierarchical tree structure. Again, going back to the shopping analogy, because it's very similar. If you've dealt with shopping campaigns before, there's a hierarchy of ad group criteria. In this case, they're hotel listing groups that you create and manage and you can bid on. And finally, bid modifiers. These replace what were called bid multipliers in a Hotel Ad Center. Bid modifiers allow you to add percentage up or percentage down, basically increase or decrease your bid based on a bunch of dimensions, about 4 different dimensions. These are the exact same dimensions that were available as bid multipliers, just the term has changed slightly in the Google Ads API. They're called bid modifiers here. Okay. So now we're going to get in a quick review of campaign management. This is the stuff that was covered in the previous Hotel Ads webinar. So this is going to be intentionally sort of high level. We're not going to get into the detail of code samples, but we do want you to go back and look at the Hotel Ads webinar from before if you want to get more info on this stuff. And here's a link to it here, and we'll present it again at the end of the section as one final reminder. Okay, we want to start out with an overview of the entities that you deal with in the Google Ads API when you're creating hotel ads campaigns, and point out some of the key differences in how they behave in the Google Ads API when you compare them to how they used to behave in the Hotel Ads Center and when you were using Travel Partner API and stuff like that. The first key thing, I mentioned this before, is that the Google Ads API doesn't use sub-accounts. So everything in the Google Ads API exists in a Google Ads account. So the top level blue box here on the left is a Google Ads client account. And you can create many of them and you can manage them with manager accounts. But the key thing is the notion of sub-accounts goes away when you're dealing with the Google Ads API. So once you have a client account created and you have campaigns that are created and budgets and your bidding strategies and all that. That's similar to how things were done before, except you're using the native objects. The second thing that you need to be sure to do, which is different from before, is create an ad group ad, or that's the term that we use for an ad. It's called an ad group ad because it's the type of ad that lives inside an ad group. But you do need to create at least one ad group ad, and hotel ads are dynamic based on the data that comes from your linked hotel partner account. But the hotel ad object does need to be there as a placeholder. So be sure in your workflow when you're going through this programmatically to specifically create an ad for just so you have one that has an ID and it exists. Another thing to note, once you get past the ad and you start dealing with the hotel groups, in the hotel ad center before, hotel groups were things that existed at the account level. They were account-wide that theoretically applied to any campaigns that existed in the account. When you're dealing with the Google Ads API, the hotel listing groups that correspond to the old hotel groups are actually ad group criteria and exist inside of an ad group. So they're ad group level criteria. So they sort of exist at a different level in the hierarchy than they did before. So that's one key difference when comparing it to the old way of doing things. And in the Google Ads API, hotel listing groups, again, we're going to talk about these more in the next section, but they're actually a type of ad group criteria, which means you can either target them or bid on them. And that makes it possible to do some pretty powerful and flexible things. For instance, you can create a hierarchy of hotel listing groups, basically hotels in the United States that are in Key West, Florida of a certain type of brand, and then bid and target them specifically on any chunk of sort of that subdivision of your hotels. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about listing groups. So they're ad group criteria because they can be targeted and they can be bid on at sort of the leaf level. You know, each individual subsection that you can subdivide your inventory by, you can bid on them. One thing I want to call out too, these fun little entity relationship diagrams. We have these for pretty much all the objects in the API, and this is a great chance to give a little shout out to Nak sitting next to me here because he's the one who generated all these diagrams. So if you go to this doc page on the bottom, it's in our Google Ads API docs/entity relationships. You can find these same sort of entity relationship diagrams for other parts of the API as well. So if this helps you sort of get your head around what's going on here with the hotel ad stuff, feel free to check that out. You can find these same type of entities for other objects in the API as well. Okay, so now we're just going to go through the steps of what it takes to actually get a hotel ad up and running. Again, this is an overview. We're not going to get too detailed here. This is from the last webinar. The last webinar takes this exact same set of steps and then goes down into sort of the code sample level and gets much more detailed. So if anything in this section is more than just a refresher and you want more information on that, definitely refer to the last webinar. So the first thing you want to do is create a hotel campaign. So that's creating a Google ad campaign of type hotel ads. And one of the important things that you do, this is at the campaign level, so the very highest level that you can, one of the important things that you do is you set a property called the Hotel Center ID. This links the Hotel Center to the Google Ads campaign. It's similarly, again, going back to the shopping analogy, the same way you create a shopping campaign and you can link it to a Merchant Center account with a Merchant Center ID. This is the same analogy here. You give it a Hotel Center ID, and this links the campaign to a corresponding hotel center and allows it to pull in all the inventory and price data from that hotel center. And so that's where the link comes from between Hotel Center and Google Ads. It's set up here at the highest level with the ID. The next thing you want to do is create at least one hotel ad group. The hotel ad groups are what contain the listing groups for targeting, and that's also where you set your CPCs. So you create the listing groups. Again, not going to get into too much detail because that little asterisk there, just to tell you, that's coming up. We got the whole section on how to do that next. And then you also set your CPCs at the hotel ad group level. You can set a default CPC for an entire ad group, and then in the listing groups, you can actually override that CPC up or down depending on what you want to do and how you want to bid. After that, you create a hotel ad group ad. Again, this is the thing I wanted to point out, especially because when you weren't dealing with the Google Ads API, when you did everything in Travel Center with the Travel Partner API, ads weren't a required thing. You'd create ad groups, you'd set everything up, and you let it run. The ads would sort of create themselves. You do need to create at least one placeholder ad here. So it's an object that you do have to create to make sure that things get up and running. Finally, once you do that, this is optional. You don't have to do this, but then you could set your bid modifiers on your ad groups. criteria. And the bid modifiers work the same way as bid multipliers in the previous way of doing things with the travel center. So just to give you an overview of all the different areas where you can sort of configure bidding throughout the different areas that you have access to here, there's from the highest level sort of down to the most granular level. At the highest level, you have a campaign-wide bidding strategy that you can set on the campaign itself. So this is how you set your bids. You can either set them to percent CPC, where you set what percentage of the hotel price you want your bid to be, or you can configure manual CPC where you actually specify CPC value. So you literally can say 50 cents, and that's what it is. And corresponding, but depending on whichever one of those bidding strategies you choose, you have options at the different levels. Either at the ad group level, you can set those CPC values. So you can set on an ad group object, you can set CPC bid micros. That sets the CPC for manual CPC bidding, or percent CPC bid micros. That's a field. So they're separate fields depending on which bidding strategy you're using. So you set percent CPC bid micros instead if you opted into percent CPC bidding. And the same thing goes with listing groups, because they're essentially our ad group criteria, so they behave very much the same way. So on each one of the individual listing group units that NAC is going to talk about in a moment, you can also set CPC bid micros or percent CPC bid micros, depending on which campaign-wide bidding strategy you've opted into. And then finally, you adjust the hotel ad-specific ad group bid modifiers. And these correspond to the bid multipliers that you use in the hotel ad center. So they're just set differently. They have a slightly different name. They're called bid modifiers instead of bid multipliers, but they behave very much the same way, and we have 4 of them, just like we did before. The first one is hotel date selection type info. You set this one based on whether users searched for specific dates when they entered their query, or they just searched for a hotel name and didn't actually put in any dates themselves, and the query just defaulted to the default dates. You use hotel advanced booking window to add a bid multiplier based on the number of days prior to the stay the booking is being made. So how many days out there the person is looking to make the booking. There's the hotel length of stay info, which allows you to add a bid multiplier for how long the stay is. And also the hotel check-in day info. This allows you to add a bid multiplier based on the day of the week on which the user wants to check in. Again, these are the exact same bid multipliers that you're used to. They're just called ad group bid modifiers now, and they're adjusted in a slightly different way. If you need any more information at a product level on how these work, not necessarily in the context of either the API or Hotel Ad Center, at the bottom of the screen is a Help Center link that talks about the different bid multipliers and how they work and how you can affect them and stuff like that. So that goes into a little bit more detail at the product level of the bid modifiers and the bid multipliers. Okay, finally, just before we close out the section, I just want to emphasize again that we have this entire section taken from a previous hotel ads overview webinar that we did already last year, I think in May, or July, excuse me. So if you want to go back, please follow this link here and watch that webinar. It's the same content in this section, except we go into a little bit more detail with some code samples and stuff like that. So any questions from here, first of all, go back and watch that one, and then if you still have questions, please definitely reach out to us at the end of the webinar. We'll give you ways you can reach out to us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nak, and he's going to talk to you about listing groups.
So thank you, Adam, for introducing. Hi again, everyone. My name is Nak, and I'm going to present about creating listing groups, which is one of the important steps of using the hotel ads in the Google Ads API. So in the Google Ads API, you can partition your hotels into listing groups across many listing dimensions, similar to the hotel groups in the Hotel Ad Center. And this will result in a multi-level tree, as you can see in the diagram on the right of the screen. We have a 3-level tree here, including the route, the hotel class level, and the hotel country region level. Nodes in the tree can be categorized into 2 types, subdivisions and units. Subdivisions are the internal nodes of a tree which define new levels, like the root or the other node of the 2nd level. On the other hand, units are the leaves of the tree, like the 5-star hotel node or the 4-star hotel node. So both subdivisions and unit nodes are an object of a listing group info class. And one important to know about the subdivisions are that they must always be complete. So what does that mean? When you create a new level via a subdivision, you start categorize hotels into many groups based on the definition of the listing dimension, right? So there must always be a last group to store all the rest of the hotels that do not fall into any categories that you have defined. For instance, in the lowest level of the tree on the slide, we group hotels in the US into the first node, the hotels in the UK in the second node. But we are not interested in grouping any hotels into any specific regions anymore. So in this case, we need to create an other node, which is the rightmost node on the screen, to contain all the rest of the hotels in order to make this level complete. Actually, other nodes can also be a subdivision, like as you can see, the other node of the second level. And once you create a listing group tree like this, you're allowed to set bits at unit levels. In this case, it's a 5-star hotels, 4-star hotels, US hotels, UK hotels, and other nodes. And as for the limit of the tree itself, you're allowed to create a tree up to maximum of 7 levels. In totally, you can have up to 20,000 nodes. Another important note I would like to emphasize here is that each listing group tree must have at least one unit node to be valid. So the smallest listing group tree possible is a tree with a root that is a unit node. And hotel ads needs a valid listing group tree to serve. So make sure you also create a listing group tree whenever you create a new hotel ad group and ad group ad. So next, I'm talking about linking hotel groups to ad group criteria. So recall this diagram that Adam has shown to you earlier in this webinar. I'll focus on the part that I highlight using a red rounded rectangle on the slide. This part of the diagram is actually equivalent to the tree I have just shown to you in the previous 2 slides. The only difference is that I excluded illustrations of having ad group criterion store listing group info objects just for the sake of simplicity. But actually, as you can see, each node needs to have its own ad group criterion containing it, and this is drawn as a rounded rectangle around each node. Let's focus more on one node. I use a 5-star hotel node as an example. If you have ever used the Google Ads API before, you probably know that an ad group criterion object contains many things like its resource name, its ad group's resource names, and etc. But we will focus only on the listing group info, which is related to our topic today. The listing group info field, as I highlight in a bold font on the slide, of the ad group criterion contains 3 things. First, the type. This is what I talked about before. Leaf nodes will have this as unit, and internal nodes of the tree will have this as subdivision. Secondly, the parent ad group criterion field is the resource name of the parent node, and I will talk about this in the next slide. Finally, the case value field. It contains the relevant listing dimension info object, which in turn contains varying content according to the level. In this particular case, the listing dimension info object contains the hotel class field, which in turn stores an object of hotel class info, because I picked up a node of the 5-star hotel. Next, I will explain the parent-child relationships in the listing group tree. Remind that the arrow points from a parent to a child. So the root is a parent of this 5-star hotel node in this screen. And because the root is a parent node of the 5-star hotel node, the resource name of the parent ad group criterion field of the 5-star hotel node should be exactly the same as the resource name of the root node, as highlighted by a dotted arrow on the screen. As for an ad group, the values of the 2 nodes ad group field should be the same because they belong to the same listing group tree of the same ad group. Apart from that, the root node actually has some special characteristics. First, its listing group field doesn't contain any case value, as you can see on the slide. This is unlike the 5-star hotel node or other specific nodes that has a listing dimension info object containing a hotel class info object. Secondly, the parent ad group criterion field of the root node must be empty. And this makes sense because the definition of the root is the topmost node of the tree, So it's not supposed to have any parent. Next, let's talk about listing dimensions. The listing dimensions are what used to define a level of the tree. Like as you can see, the second level, we use a hotel class, and for its third level, we use hotel country region. So if you recall the code that I have shown to you before about the APAC criterion, it contains many things, including the listing group field, which in turn stores the listing group info object. In that, there is a case value field, which contains the listing dimension info, and this is what I'm talking about. So the listing dimension info object actually contains many one-off fields. So the one-off fields are actually the concept of the protocol buffer. It means that among all optional fields you have, you can set at most one field at a time. So shown on the right of the screen is all the one-off fields of the listing dimension info. The list shows the possible listing dimensions that you can use in the hotel ads, and we are planning to add more in the future. So as a particular example for this case, in the first level of the example, we need to specify the hotel class field because we are using the hotel class as a dimension. The hotel class field inside the listing dimension info object stores the hotel class info object. So once you set the hotel class field in the listing dimension info here, you cannot set other fields like hotel IDs or hotel states. Trying to do so will fail and return you an error. And one caveat I would like to share here is that the one-off fields of listing dimension info class are not all applicable to the hotel ads. Some of them are applicable to shopping ads. So make sure that you are using only possible listing dimensions I show in this slide. Let's move on to the next topic, the case values of other nodes. As you can see in this example, we pick up the United States node here, which is defined by a dimension of hotel country region. So in the case value, we specify the hotel country region field by using an object of hotel country region info. In that, it contains a value of the geo-target constant. Here it is the 2840. And actually, you can look up for the region's constants by following the guide linked in this slide. It will show you how to query for a specific region that you would like to set. For the other nodes of the same level of this dimension, you're supposed to specify the hotel country region field again, but to an empty object of the hotel country region info class. So one thing to note here is that the case value is not totally empty. You need to still set the case value to the listing dimension info object. In that, you need to still set the same field as other specific fields in the same level. So in this level, again, we using the hotel country region as a dimension, so we need to specify the hotel country region field. So far, I have explained many things by using the dummy IDs as a resource name, and that's for the sake of simplicity, and it's probably easier to explain to you one feature at a time. But actually, without this feature that I'm going to present to you, you probably cannot create any listing group tree. Let's see why. So recall that a listing group tree is invalid until it is complete, right? I have stated this before. This means whenever you create a subdivision, you must also create at least one of its children in the same request. However, add group criteria are not assigned IDs until they are created by the server or until you are sending your request to the server, right? So you don't have any real IDs to set. So you cannot use any real IDs to set as a parent add group criterion field of the children. And because you cannot create a child nodes, then your listing group tree will never is complete. And this is kind of paradox. That's why in the Google Ads API, we are providing this feature. It's called temporary IDs. The temporary IDs allow you to set the parent's resource name of the child nodes using any negative integers, which are locally unique. within one mutate request, meaning that if you send another separate request, you can reset the temporary IDs and start from any IDs you want. But we recommend starting temporary IDs from -1 because we think that it's the easiest way of managing the IDs. Let's see a concrete example. So as you can see on the slide, for the root node, when we are trying to create it, we need to specify a resource name here. And I'm using the resource name of customers / your customer ID, add group criterion / -1, meaning that we start from -1 as the first ID of this set of temporary IDs. And after that, when you're trying to create a 5-star hotel node, I highlight the parent add group criterion field here. As you can see, we can use exactly the same resource name of the root node that I have used before, which is customer / customer ID / add group criterion / -1. And you can follow this pattern for creating other levels as well. And note that although I specify the resource name of the 5-star hotel node here, it's totally optional for a leaf node or a unit node because you are not using that resource name in other places. I just included here just for the sake of demonstration, so you can get the idea of how you can progress the temporary IDs. Note again that the temporary IDs are negative integers. So when you progress the IDs, you do not increase it, you decrease it from -1 to -2 to -3 and etc. And here comes the final slide of my section today. I have presented many concepts of the listing group tree, and it's probably quite confusing because we have many types of nodes and many of the concepts like listing dimension, listing group info, and etc. So this table, we summarized the node types along with the add group criterion code example of them. So first, the unit node type, as you can see, and if you recall, I have stated that a unit node is allowed to set a bit on it. So here you have an option to set the %CPC bit micros in case you use a %CPC bidding strategy to the value you want. And then in the listing group info object, of course, because we're using a unit node, we need to set the type to unit. And finally, the case value you need to set to any listing dimension that you would like to use in that level. So in this particular example, I used the hotel class info object. As for the second type, it is subdivision. Of course, you need to set the type of the listing group info object to subdivision. And for the case value, you need to set the same listing dimension as other specific nodes in the same level. So in this particular example, by following the previous example of unit node, I used hotel class field as an example of the case value here. And finally, for the root nodes, you can set the type to either subdivision or unit. But most of the time, you probably need to use a subdivision. Because if you use this unit as a type, it means that you're trying to create the smallest listing group tree, which contains only one unit node as a root. And it's probably not quite interesting to you because you probably want to categorize your hotels into many groups and set the bits accordingly. Apart from that, the parent add group criterion, again, should be empty because it is a root. It doesn't contain any parent. And finally, for the case value, it must be empty as well because we are not defining any dimensions in this level. And that's all for my session today. I will hand over back to Adam. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nak. All right, now we're going to continue on, and the next section is reporting. So promised you listing groups, and we also promised you reporting. So now we're going to move on to reporting aspects that are specific to hotel ads in the Google Ads API. Okay, so first of all, taking a step back and just talking a little bit about reporting with the Google Ads API in general. The way you fetch data from the Google Ads API is with a query language that looks a lot like SQL or SQL if you've ever had any experience with databases, but it's not SQL. It's called the Google Ads Query Language. And it's a unified query language that allows you to fetch objects and reports together from the API. So this is the generic way that we have for getting data out of the API, whether it's reports or even objects themselves. If you just wanted to get a list of your campaigns, for example, you would use this same type of reporting mechanism. And how it works is we have some example queries I'll show you in a second, but how it works is you basically you create a query to fetch data that's remarkably like SQL. Basically, you say things like select impressions, clicks, cost from campaign, where date during the last 30 days. And literally, that's exactly what you'll get back. So it's extremely powerful and extremely flexible because it allows you to craft queries for almost any type of data that you want from the Google Ads API. The link at the bottom of this slide is a reporting overview programming guide that gives you some guidance in general on how to do reporting with the Google Ads API overall. I definitely encourage looking at that to get your feet wet and understand how things work in general. But to look at an actual query, again, this is generic first before getting into anything hotel ad specific. You would use the for example, say you wanted to issue a 2-line request to get data from the Google Ads API. I think this example, the query syntax here is in Ruby, but what we're trying to show you here is what the statement looks like. Again, it looks a lot like SQL, and that's intentional. We want it to be familiar. We want people to understand how to use it. So in this query here, we're selecting keyword text, ad group name, campaign name, and impressions, clicks, CTR, and average CPC from something called the keyword view. And now that's a view that links up, similar to a database view, that links up all the information in the Google Ads backend that has to do with keywords and defines a common schema over it and allows you to query it. So you'll see the part of the query here says where date during the last 30 days, and ad group status is enabled, ad group criteria is either enabled or paused. So that allows you to refine your query further, and what you get back from the Google Ads API is a set of objects that looks something like what's on the bottom here. You get each row of your result set has the campaign you asked for, the ad group you asked for, the keyword you asked for, and the metrics you asked for, all wrapped up in a bundle. So the average CPC, clicks, CTR, impressions that you asked for, all come back in a single row of the API request. So naively, if you wanted to use this same type of query to get information about your hotel ad groups, you could do something like this. This sort of demonstrates how powerful and flexible the query language is, because this does work and you can do something like this, although it's not the optimal way. I'm going to show you that in a second, but just to give you an idea of how simple it would be to say limit your results to hotel ads, you can have a very similar query that you had in the last slide, like campaign name, status, ad group name, and impressions and clicks from all my ad groups, where ad group type equals hotel ads. So just that qualifier that says ad group type equals hotel ads suddenly limits your entire result set just to hotel ad groups. And each result of your result set will have a campaign, an ad group, and its metrics, the ones that you asked for, the impressions and clicks associated with it. However, this is not the best way to get reporting for hotel ads in general, because just like we have the keywords view that provides you with an optimized way of getting all your data related to keywords from a single source and a single query, we also have something called the hotel performance view. Now, this is a special view of our reporting segments and metrics that's specifically designed to give you performance data on your hotel ad performance. It provides ad group and campaign level metrics and provides a whole bunch of hotel ad specific segments, as you see on the right side of the slide here, that are specifically designed to help you segment your report specifically for hotel ads. So you have, for instance, you can get your report grouped by the days of the booking window, get your metrics and stuff grouped by hotel center ID, by hotel city, hotel class, hotel country, hotel length of stay. All these things are different ways you can slice and dice and essentially group by. If you're thinking in that SQL mentality, you can group by your data. And in fact, these last two, hotel rate rule ID, hotel rate type, these are two new segments that we just added recently for version 1.3 of the Google Ads API. So we're continually adding more hotel ad specific functionality and getting these things out to you as soon as we can. So one important thing to notice about the hotel performance view, though, is it's across all your different listing groups. Or put another way, it's agnostic of any specific listing group. There's no way to filter. You're not going to get per listing group. So per the listing group tree that Max just discussed in his last section, this hotel performance view is designed to give you an overall view outside of your listing group and your targeting criteria. This gives you performance across the board. It's not made. We have a separate view I'll go into in a second, where if you're trying to get reporting on individual nodes and individual leafs of that listing group tree, we do have a way to do it. But this hotel performance view doesn't actually give that granular level of information. It's meant instead for getting wider hotel ads performance view. So we're going to look at a query here real quick of what an example query would look like to query the hotel performance view to get stats that you might be interested in. So again, this looks a lot like SQL. It's a select statement with the segment. So the segments here are the things you are sort of like automatic group bys in your SQL. There's going to be one row in your result set for each one of these things. Essentially, you're grouping by ad network type, device, hotel center ID, and everything in the segment section here. And then the metrics are the things you're actually getting report data on. And in this particular query, you're getting that hotel ad specific segmentation by the highlighted segments here. These are the ones that are unique to hotel ads. And this query is mainly focused on getting impression share data. So we're trying to get the search top impression share, the absolute top impression share, and the search impression share, along with some other key metrics like average position, impressions, clicks, cost. But this query is designed to get basically hotel-specific segmented impression share data, because we know that's an important metric that a lot of hotel partners are frequently trying to get from the API. Another thing that we want to point out here that you can also include click type, because we know that segmenting by click type is a very important way to view and slice your data. If you were to include click type in the segments above, one thing you would have to do is drop the impression share metrics though, because click type and impression share in Google Ads reporting system are sort of mutually exclusive. You can either segment by click type or get impression share. It doesn't make sense to get impression share by click type. That's not a way that we support segmenting our data. So just wanted to point that out here, that if you did add, that's why click type isn't in this query at the top, because we did want to show you the impression share data. And if you did want to get click type segmentation, you can sure as heck add it in the top, but you would have to drop the impression share columns to make it a valid query. Okay, so moving on to the hotel group view. So this is a different view besides the hotel performance view that allows you to get individual reporting on each one of your listing groups. So if you did want to get reporting on sort of the leaf nodes of that tree that Knack mentioned, to see what your impressions, clicks, cost, CTR were based on one of those sections of the tree, you would use the hotel group view to do it. It provides ad group and campaign level segmentation performance metrics at that hotel listing group level. One thing, again, to point out, like I pointed out in the last slide, was the hotel ad specific segments, like days, length of stay and stuff like that. The segmentations that are unique to hotel ads aren't available in the hotel group view, mainly because the hotel listing groups are essentially their ad group criteria, right? It's the same thing as targeting by a keyword or something like that. And so these are designed to get you advertising data like impressions, clicks, and costs on your ad group criteria for targeting and bidding purposes. So the data that you get from this very narrow slice is meant to be sort of very uniquely drilled down and easily comparable to other types of ad group criteria. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to break this down in a hotel ad specific way. So for example, at the chart on the right, this is similar to one of the trees that Knack used in his example. We had 5-star hotels, 4-star hotels, and other, and then your other was segmented between the United States, UK, and then something else. And you wanted to find out just how that United States segment was doing. To get that report, you would pass in, you would specify the ID of that segment, the United States segment, which is in sort of that RESTful format, customers/customer ID, hotel group view / the hotel group view ID. And then you would actually be able to pull a query like here, date, impressions, clicks, cost, CTR for that specific leaf of the tree. And that's what it gets you. So that's these are the two hotel specific views that we have in our reporting mechanism. And well, I think most of your reporting needs are going to be served by the hotel performance view. When you do want to get down into the details of how your different listing groups are performing, the hotel group view is key for actually doing an apples to apples comparison to see how the different nodes of your tree are performing against one another. Okay, so that sort of wraps up the content here on reporting and actually the webinar in general. Before we go and get to the questions, we want to just leave you with some resources that we mentioned and a couple that we didn't, that are going to be helpful for you in getting started and understanding a lot of this stuff here. So this is sort of a general laundry list of all the different documentation, the previous webinars, and support options we have. Just want to go through this real quick. The main Google Ads API developer site right at the start there is developers.google.com/Google Ads/API. That's the one-stop shop for everything Google Ads API related. If you want to still get some information on the pieces of information like prices and inventory that are still living in the hotel hotel center side of things, and you still use the travel center API to use, check out a good starting point is a hotel prices integration overview. The link there takes you right to the data feed section, and so that gives you, so for the counterpoint, the counterpart of everything that happens in the Google Ads API for the hotels and the hotel prices information that still stays in the other API. That's the main homepage to get for all the information that you need regarding those two features. We do have a hotel ads guide as part of our Google Ads API developer site. That a lot of the stuff that we did early on about creating campaigns and stuff like that, you could find those code examples that we had in our previous webinar as well came from this hotel ads guide. So you could find sort of the whole thing laid out in a programming guide there. And these next three are PHP code examples. We have an example for how to add a hotel ad, how to adjust your ad group bid modifiers in one of the 4 bid multipliers that were in Travel Center. And I think most relevant to this webinar at the bottom, hotel listing group tree. We have a full code example on how to create and manage one of the trees that Matt talked about. So that could be a little technically complicated. So we definitely think having the code example available will help you out in understanding how those work. Again, just calling out the previous webinars, we have had a couple other previous webinars of the Google Ads API, but the most recent one was our Google Ads API roadmap and migration. So if you want to get a little bit more familiar with the Google Ads API itself outside of the context of hotel ads, I would definitely encourage going back and watching the Google Ads API roadmap and migration session. And then hotel ads specifically, we have that last hotel ads overview that I referred to from last year. That's where we went into the more detailed session on the campaign management that we started out with and only gave a review of in this particular webinar. Finally, we have the support section here. So for anything related to the Google Ads API, that now, because native hotel ads are native as part of the Google Ads API, anything related to using the Google Ads API to manage your hotel ads, we do have direct email support available to you. So if it's programming specific, if it's related to the Google Ads API and how hotel ads work in that context, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at googleadsapi-support@google.com. We have a team of support engineers who will answer your questions and help you out. And if they can't, they will forward the questions or concerns onto the right people to make sure they get addressed. So that's a one-stop shop sort of for getting support when something goes wrong with the Google Ads API, and that does include hotel ads. I also want to call out the Google Ads developer blog. Anything that's any announcement related to hotel ads, the Google Ads API in general, the migrations that we've been talking about, the earlier slides, like the AdWords API versus Google Ads API migration, anything related to our Google Ads developer products, that's the primary means of disseminating information. And so we strongly recommend people look at that blog frequently, subscribe to it so they get posts and notifications when we do put something there, because that's critical. If we need to get a hold of get out information about anything in particular, that's where we put it first. And finally, we do have the Google Ads API forum. It's a Google group on the bottom there titled AdWords API. That is a many-to-many. It's a community-driven support, even though we do have engineers on our team who do monitor the forum there. So you do occasionally will get help from people on our team if some other people from the developer community can't provide answers for a particular topic. And it's also actually a really great repository of knowledge because it's been out there for a while. You have people who've asked many types of questions over many years. So it's a great search victim. So you can go in there, and if you have any questions or looking for any topics, search the forum first, see if it's been asked and answered already. You might be able to get help really quick that way. So check that out when all else fails as well, because the Google Ads API forum can be of great help. Okay, with that, I think we are going to switch. We have one new resource I also want to bring to your section before we get to the Q&A. This is actually not hotel ads specific. This is Google Ads API in general, but we want to bring this to our attention because this is a tool that we released just in the past 2 weeks and a few weeks, and we think it's going to be pretty helpful for people just getting started with the Google Ads API. So if you're just starting with your hotel ads migration, you haven't used the Google Ads API yet, this is the perfect time to try out this tool, see if it's helpful for you. If it is, tell us. If it's not, definitely tell us so we can fix it and make it better. What this thing is the Google Ads API Docker. It's a separate binary that you can download from this GitHub project that's linked here at the bottom of the screen. And what it does is it helps you through one of the most cumbersome parts of setting up a Google Ads API client, which is making sure your OAuth credentials are configured and set up and working properly. That can be a huge headache to get those working properly. So this is a standalone tool that allows you to verify that your OAuth 2 credentials are correctly configured and everything's ready to make an API call. It can guide you through fixing any OAuth 2 problems that it detects and verify that the configuration has been corrected. So this is basically, like the name says, the Google Ads API Doctor. It's a tool that can doctor your right now your OAuth 2 related illnesses in your setup and hopefully get them fixed for you as well. We have a recent blog announcement that we announced last month as well. You can click on the link there to read a little bit more about it. But more importantly, please just go to the GitHub page, download a copy, and try it out and see how it works. I believe we are right now. It's written in Go, and we have a Go language version available. We're working on getting other distributions available as well. So you don't necessarily need to download it in Go. We're going to have distributions of this for other architectures, possibly Linux, maybe Windows. We're going to explore getting those native binaries of this in other languages, so you don't necessarily have to try to run the Go version yourself if Go isn't a language that you're currently working in or have much experience working in. So please, please, please try this out. Let us know how it works. If you have any issues, use the GitHub tracker straight away, file some issues, and we'll make sure we get those fixed. This is something new we think is going to help people. So please be our guinea pigs, so to speak, if you're coming to the Google Ads API for the first time, and let us know how this works for you because we're pretty excited about it. Okay, moving on to the Q&A. Going to switch over now, and I think looks like we just have one question. We'll answer that one. If anybody has any burning questions, now's the time when we answer this one. Can sneak any in. If not, we're just going to answer the one question that we have here. Okay, do my listing groups always have to have subdivisions? Can I just create units?
So I'll answer this question. As I have presented before, it's totally possible to create just units in like the second level of the tree, meaning that you have a root and then in the only next level containing only units. That's totally fine, but you will be able to use only one listing dimension of that tree. So is that fine to you? It's probably fine, but again, just be careful that you need to create an other node for that level 2. So let's say you have created a listing dimension of hotel IDs. You specify any hotel IDs before, but at the end of the level, you need to still create another node for that hotel ID. So if you find with that, it's totally possible.
Okay, excellent. Okay, anybody else? Any more questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, we are sold. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions related to any of the stuff that we had in the webinar here on the Hotel Ads API or the Google Ads API, anything developer related, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on the forum or reach out to us directly via one-on-one email at googleadsapi-support@google.com. Thank you very much.